Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful, wonderful session of our Welcoming Week 2021. We are absolutely over the moon, ecstatic, and traveling through the stars that we have this cooking sensation, this food influencer, and somebody who is really making her part of the world in Queens, New York, more welcoming, more delicious, and making us more hungry all the time. I'd like to welcome Caroline to our program. Who is the creator and person who is bringing Cooking with Granny to us. Caroline, hello and welcome to our Welcoming Week sessions.
Hi, everyone. How are you? How are you?
Good, nice to see you. And if you don't mind, Caroline, real quick, you were sharing a little bit about those gorgeous teddy bear sunflowers next to you. Could you just tell us a little bit about that, where you got them, and why you, as an amazing cook, go to that place to get not only the food that we're going to see today, but these beautiful flowers?
Sure. So I live in Queens, New York, but in Manhattan, there's this famous, it's called Union Square Market. It's a farmer's market, and it's really just any cook's paradise. I'm talking about home cooks. I'm talking about professional chefs. I mean, you have stand after stand from different farmers, and I got a whole bunch of stuff. As you know, I got like a big bag of heirloom tomatoes. I mean, I had filled up my bag, and the only reason I had to stop shopping was because my bag had gotten too heavy. I got mushroom vodka for my husband. I'm saying, like, they have some really, really, really impeccable fruits and vegetables, but also these really interesting concoctions like mushroom vodka. I saw these teddy bear sunflowers, and I just fell in love with them. I love sunflowers in general, just because they bring so much to me, like joy and light. And I saw these, and like each bloom is like the size of my head, so I had to get that.
They're beautiful. They're really nice. They really light up the whole this whole conversation. Would you tell us a little bit, Caroline, what will you be cooking today, and why is what you're cooking so important to your family and to who you are as this extraordinary human being?
Well, thank you. I am making Korean bulgogi. So this is really thinly sliced ribeye steak, and so so that's what I'm going to be making. This is like a mainstay in my mom on my grandma's dinner table. I grew up eating this every week. It's rather simple, and if you go to a Korean restaurant, it's one of the top one of the top listings under the barbecue menu in a Korean restaurant. It's a classic. It's
Mhm.
delicious, and it's not that hard to make. I make this quite a lot, quite often. I'm a fan, and my daughter loves it. She's two, and she loves it. So yeah, for me, well, see, for me, I think that especially in immigrant families, which is what most of us in America are from, food is one of the last vestiges of our immigrant parents or grandparents' cultural legacy. So, I mean, like, food is always what we're drawn to, right? We're always hungry. We always need to eat. We see comfort in food. There's soul food in there, and that's what grandma's food and that's what mom's food is. And bulgogi to me is that. It's cultural heritage. And for my daughter, especially, for me, when I cook this for her, it's not just about feeding her because she's hungry and I want to give her something delicious. But to me, it's really about, okay, I'm teaching you and I'm passing down your Korean culture, our Korean culture, through the food. This is something that I cook for you, my mom, my grandma. My grandma is actually a refugee from North Korea. My mom is an immigrant from South Korea. And my grandma brought this recipes over through generations because obviously her mom had taught her. So for me, it's really about teaching my daughter in a very, very important part of her identity, both in terms of family, in terms of immigrant culture, and of course in terms of women's contributions to the household. So to me, that's really what cooking Korean food is about.
Caroline, so your idea, which is such a personal one, which is you're sharing your extraordinary culture and amazing Korean cuisine and the everything that goes with it. But you're doing it almost in the lens of like this matriarchy, right? Your mom and your grandmother, now your amazing daughter, and through this this process of making dinner, you're kind of speaking to something a lot bigger. And could you talk a little bit about that? You referred to the Cooking with Granny program, but it's almost like this idea about how we kind of understand ourselves through our ancestors. How did you come up with Cooking with Granny? I mean, clearly it's personal, but you mentioned, about the immigrant story that so many of us have, and you're kind of on this journey of collecting these stories that are told by, all of our grandmothers. And so many people have these fond memories, and yet it speaks to something that's very real and present.
So I've actually wanted to do Cooking with Granny ever since I was a kid. I grew up with my mom and my grandmother in the kitchen. I helped. So my mom, she was living, she had a really, kind of like, I don't know, the typical or the commonly occurring immigrant life where she was really working all the time. So my grandmother really helped raise us. And, a part of that meant going out and grocery shopping with her, cooking with her. And, as we would cook together, and we would make all kinds of traditional foods. Like I would help her make kimchi. I would help her, roast seaweed. I would help her. Like all these really, really traditional dishes, a lot of them actually that that you don't see in restaurants and aren't really made at home as much as it used to, like even in Korea, because, you have, larger companies that are making them. And, making kimchi can be a pretty time-consuming process. So I grew up, under my grandmother's wing in the kitchen, and I always knew that there was something really special there. Also because it wasn't just because the food was so good, and my grandmother is known throughout like our family diaspora for being an amazing cook. She really, really is. So I was so lucky to have this opportunity to learn from this amazing cook, but also, like I was saying before, she's a refugee from North Korea. So she would tell me about how she had escaped from North Korea to South Korea. And and it was a really harrowing experience, and she was only a teenager. And, honestly, I used to find kind of history classes a little boring because it was so fact and date based. But when my grandma would tell her story, that's really when the story of, Korean, the separation of Korea into North and South Korea, and then the Korean War, which my grandmother lived through, and then the immigration from South Korea to the U.S., and then how I was born. That really came alive in her story, and I grew up with a lot of friends from diverse immigrant background here in Queens, New York, and I knew that my grandma is not the only one with this kind of story, and more importantly, this kind of formative experience. So ever since I was a kid, cooking with my grandmother, and also being really lucky enough to be able to eat out at my friends' homes, I always knew that there was something so special about immigrant home cooking, and I knew I wanted to do something. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a book. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a video series. But then when I went to Columbia Journalism School, and I concentrated in video, so I was like, okay, you know what? Let's finally make this happen. And I launched a Kickstarter campaign, and my video production skills weren't that great, but I was like, no, that I believe so strongly in this, and I really want to capture my grandmother while she's like really spry and active. So that's how Cooking with Granny started.
That is so awesome. So would you tell us a little bit about your ingredients and kind of this deliciousness as we all start to salivate and wish that we were in your Queen's kitchen, Caroline?
Oh yeah, sure. Actually, so this is like a little trick for like tenderizing your beets. Like Korean people do this a lot. So I'm going to do this first just because, usually you want to marinate this for 30 minutes. But so I'm going to do this first. So kiwi, I don't know if you saw me, but I peeled a kiwi. This is a pound of beef. And I'm going to put some kiwi in here. Or sorry, I actually put some kiwi in here. I'm going to mash it up. So kiwi, it's like the citric acid that starts tenderizing the beef. So this is a really, really, this goes for like any beef. It's a really quick way to tenderize beef, but you don't want to leave it in there for too long because then your beef will just get really kind of like mushy. But this is a fast way to tenderize your beef. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to leave this I'm just gonna leave the kiwi with the beef for until, as I'm doing the other steps. And so yeah, so I just have the beef with the kiwi here.
And when did you go to the butcher and you said, please cut this specific kind of meat this way? Or how do you, if somebody wanted to do this at home, how would they do that?
So yes, so Korean, I mean, because this is such a classic recipe, when you go to a Korean grocery store, you already have this cut. It already says bulgogi on it. But if you go to you could go to a butcher, ask them for a rib eye, and ask them to slice it really, really thin. Yeah, so that's, yeah, you can get this cut either way. But so
and
do you go to any Korean grocery store, you will find this. If you don't find it, you're not in a Korean grocery store.
That's good. That's good. And Caroline, will you, when you do this, is this meal something that's a more, does the meal happen more frequently? Is it a specific holiday or a themed meal, or is this kind of like something that you would have, on the regular in a Korean household in terms of dinner, say on a Tuesday night?
Okay, let me just say this. We love this. So it's all of the above. It is all of the above. When we had my daughter's first birthday party, which is a really huge deal, or even my wedding, we had bulgogi, because it's a classic. It's one of the celebratory dishes, but at the same time, because it's not that difficult to make, you'll see, it's a common weekday dinner dish as well. So it's really all of the above. I think we just kind of want any excuse to eat it.
I can appreciate that. Now, the what you're doing now, you're peeling the garlic. Obviously, the garlic is an important part of the recipe. Do you find that you can do this throughout the year because the ingredients are so commonly used that it's easy to do, or do you find that there's variations based on the season? And if you were to go to Korea and someone were to serve this, would it taste the same way?
Okay, so the recipe doesn't really change because it's not really based on seasonal ingredients. Yeah, we have the kiwi, and sometimes you could use the Asian pear, but it's not absolutely mandatory. So, you can really have this year round and the recipe won't change much. In terms of Korean food in Korea versus Korean food in the US, what I have been told is that Korean food in the US lean a little bit more sweet. There's a little bit more use of sugar. They have sugar. This can be like a sweeter dish, but I've definitely gone to Korean restaurants here where it's really sweet. I don't really like them. Like my mom and my grandma didn't cook with so much sugar, but I have tasted it where it's really sweet. I've been told by my Korean American immigrant friends, or those who visit Korea pretty often, that it's a little bit sweeter here.
And when you are you said your daughter loves it and your family loves to make this, is this something that is there, it feels like so familiar. It feels like it's, I don't want to call it a comfort food, Caroline, because that has its own connotations in the food world, but it just feels like something that is both really delicious from all the vegetables that you have on your table, pretty nutritious.
Yeah.
And yet it's something that evokes a certain feeling. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that. How does it make you feel? What's the emotion around this kind of amazing Korean dish?
I guess it depends. It depends on the situation, right? So if I'm making this for my daughter, and I'm a new mom, she only just turned 2. So I'm still, it wasn't that long ago where we started feeding her solids, but I always knew that I wanted her to have a Korean palate. So now when she eats this, and oh my God, it makes me so, when I'm with my daughter, it's about pride, it's about, I feel so proud that my daughter loves this. And I feel so good in myself, actually, that I was able to create this Korean palate in her, because like I was saying, I think a lot of the recipes that have been passed down, it is such, it is our it is our connection to our culture. It defines,
Yes.
who we are. So seeing her like readily eat this, like, she just like grabs it with her hands, and she just like gets slobbers all over, like,
And you're like, your immigrant DNA is like lighting up as she's like devouring this food from the homeland.
Yes, exactly. So that makes me really, really happy. But then if I'm having it, with my siblings, then, we actually talk about, like, we'll say, oh, remember mom used to make this
Mm-hmm.
all the
Mm-hmm.
time, or like, remember grandma used to make this. So then it's about nostalgia,
Mm-hmm.
so, it, and then at the same time, if my sips and I are like super hungry, then we just start devouring it really quickly, so then
Mm-hmm.
it's about like happiness because we get
Right.
to eat something so tasty,
Right.
my mom still makes this. So when I go and see her, I'm actually going to see her tonight, when I go see her, she always has this out on the table still, so it really is just, it's just part of the landscape of my family.
Yeah.
Like really, it's been with us, I don't know, since I could eat.
Yeah. As you're making this, Caroline, I'm curious because we there's a few restaurants in Cleveland that are Korean, and it is such a unique dining experience when you eat Korean food, right? It is different than other restaurants. Obviously, Korean culture is so beautiful and specific in its own way, but I'm always amazed at all the small dishes that are on the table and the different
Yeah.
flavors. And it just seems like as a cook, you're trying to make this meal, but you're incorporating all these different elements of sweet and sour and heat. And I'm just wondering, like, it has this made you a cook in general? Is it something that's kind of like opened up your mind to like cooking and has made you explore other cultures as a result of this?
Oh yeah. So actually cooking with Brandy isn't just about Korean culture, and it's not just about my grandma. She's the one, she was like the grand matriarch of Cooking with Granny, but it's about all different immigrant grandmothers and really kind of like the domestic labor that they do in the kitchen and really celebrating their work, their really delicious labor intensive work. Um, so yeah, and I grew up in New York, really eating home cooking from all different cultures, and also just eating out at all the different restaurants we have here. Queens is by square footage the most diverse place in the entire world, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. And so, I would literally like hop from it's felt to me like I could hop from like Mexico to China to even Australia to, just like name a country, we have their food here, And I grew up like food and eating has always been my favorite my favorite activity. My college essay was, you had for college, you had to write a personal statement about, your favorite hobby. And I wrote about eating. This is what I'm saying. I love eating. I was so lucky that I grew up with my mom and my grandma because their food was so freaking good. There was it obviously became my favorite activity. And yeah, so it was definitely not just Korean food. I love foods of I just love eating anything tasty. And it doesn't have for me, it's not so much about the aesthetic. Like I don't care how pretty it is, like how good does it taste? So that's why for me, I love home style foods, whether it's, like my friend's home cooking or their family's home cooking, or I go to a restaurant and it's more like that family style vibe. Like that's really to me, that's what speaks to my heart. And so even as a food journalist, that's what I cover. I cover immigrant owned small businesses, specifically restaurants, where they're able to parlay their immigrant food cooking skills into a business, and they have their restaurants. So I cover a lot of immigrant owned restaurants here in Queens, New York. And it's, yeah, I just love eating and cooking. So yes, it is absolutely outside of just Korean food too. And yeah, and I cook a lot of I actually really do cook a lot of the recipes of the grandmothers that have been on the show so far. So, I'll be cooking these Honduran banana fritters. I'll be making what is it? This like Greek octopus stew. Like for me, like it just, if it tastes good, I want to try to make it. Just the other day I made, just yesterday, I picked up zucchini blossoms again at the Union Square Farmers Market. And I made like fried zucchini blossoms, which is something that I grew up in Queens and Flushing. My next door neighbor was this Italian immigrant family. They grew zucchini and tomatoes, and then the mom, she used to give me these fried zucchini blossoms. You don't see them at restaurants. And I was like, what is this? So it really, like those memories, those food memories, especially from these like immigrant moms, really, really stuck out to me. And so I made these zucchini blossoms yesterday. They weren't as good as hers, but they were tasty.
Right. So you talked a little bit about the meat, and then you showed us the kiwi, and then you were getting the garlic ready, and then we see some green onions there. What are the recipes, and what is the recipe of this dish? What are the ingredients?
Yeah, so it is, okay, so we have the beef, we have the kiwi for tenderizing. I am right now making the marinade. So that's onion, garlic, carrot. Oh, so the thing is, like the onion, like my mom always told me to like keep it like this so that you have like full circles, as if you're like onion rings kind of. But she thinks that's prettier. So I cut my onion, to her standards. And then we have scallions, and then we have a bunch of different sauces here. So there's soy sauce, there's sesame oil, sesame seeds, and pepper. I am actually going to taste this kiwi. I'm going to see how sweet it is, which will determine whether or not I add sugar.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And so this is the recipe that you probably know by heart, but have you done anything like with writing? I mean, we talked a little bit about a book that might be coming out and a book tour. And, obviously you're a huge influencer. You're kind of really making people pay attention to things. Do you see that book will have the recipes of the grannies that are in there? And how do you foresee that? I mean, this idea that you have of telling the story of, you're really telling the story of the world in the lens of the United States. How do you do that in terms of like a book? And it just seems like, do people come to you? Like, how do you, I mean, this creative idea just seems to really be growing like a beautiful tree.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm actually always looking for grandmothers to feature and grandmother stories. So whether it's our social media, I'm always looking for grandma recipe stories. And then for the book, I'm absolutely actually looking for grandmothers who have really interesting stories that I would love to be able to tell in the cookbook. So I was actually telling you before, I was keeping a lot of Cooking with Granny local, just because of access. I'm here. It's easier for me to film and interview grandmothers. But for the cookbook, I absolutely want to, extend that outside of New York to really tell the broader American immigrant story. So I would love to actually feature, grandmothers who are in Cleveland or in Nashville, or so really anybody can email me or DM me on Instagram and tell me about their grandmothers or specific grandmother recipes, and I would absolutely love to feature them, whether it's for social media or the cookbook.
Thank you for that. And it's just interesting because like you're so, your Columbia journalism, you're featured in the New York Times and all these really big stories, but the stories that you're telling are so personal, and they're so, I'm sure that when you come across some of these grandmothers, it must feel like you're part of their family.
Yes. Yeah. It's really a special thing to be invited to somebody's home to eat. And then especially with grandmothers, they're not out on social media trying to get likes or anything. So when they actually do invite me over, it's really special. And I feel so like, I don't know, I feel so like gracious, that they're allowing me to film. And the funny thing is, after the videos air or after the social media content goes up, the family members actually reach out to me and they go, that's so funny, I didn't know this about my mom, or I didn't know this about my grandmother. And so it's really a way of like keeping these stories alive, but also just kind of airing them out, like really sharing them. And I think for a lot of I don't know, I think a lot of people don't really talk as much about their struggles, especially for immigrants, like
Yeah,
the struggles that they had before they came here.
that's right.
I don't think they really share them as much. Sometimes it's just so it hurts too deeply. Um, and for others, they just want to focus on the present. They don't want to go
Mhm,
back.
mhm,
They don't want to open old wounds.
right.
So it's really a way of telling these stories, because these stories are, honest to God, like what has created what America is right now. I think the diversity of America is what makes it such a powerhouse. And you get that only because of, diverse minds coming together. And that's really what America is. And that's what these stories are. So I just think it's so important to tell them, and also to remind people, hey, like, we all come from somewhere. And like let's celebrate the troubles that our ancestors went through, so that we can like live in a pretty great place. Yes, there are lots of problems. I don't know a country that doesn't have problems. But yeah, it's a feeling of thankfulness for
Right,
what our ancestors have gone through, so we can live here.
right,
Yeah, anyway,
right.
I can go on and on.
No, no, I appreciate it. I have a question to ask you, since you're such you're such a person in the know. Do you watch the show Ted Lasso?
No, I don't, but I have family members who are telling me to watch it.
So I'm not, no spoilers here, but there's this one part in the first season where the main character Ted is trying to explain kind of how he sees the world, but how the world sees him, Caroline.
Mhm.
And he quotes Walt Whitman and when it was a real turning point in his life as a young person. And the quote was written on this wall in his hometown. And the quote from Walt Whitman was, "Be curious, not judgmental."
Mhm.
And it just reminds me of what you're doing, which is you're awakening this international curiosity in people, not just international, but just, it's something that's so fundamental, which is to learn something new and to experience this. And through this course of this meal, it just you must feel very gratified at the end of your sessions, because you've opened all these doors.
Yeah. So Cooking with Granny, it started off as a video series, but then I started getting requests from my audiences, because they wanted to meet the grandmothers and obviously taste their foods, because a lot of these foods are not ones that you can find at restaurants, right? And so after every event that we did, because it's me up there with a grandmother teaching the grandmother's recipes, and I'm interviewing her as we're speaking, so that like her story really kind of spools out of there. And afterwards, a lot of what the greatest thing I think for me is when my audience members who are not from the grandmother's culture is able to find a connection and say, you know what, my family is Dominican, and it could be food related, and they can say something like, oh, my family is Dominican and they use that ingredient too, or like we make sure to to do that cooking technique, or that step as well. Or it could be something cultural, whether it could be something like, oh yeah, like my grandmother, like she never threw out a plastic container. Like if we bought like a peanut butter or something, like we always kept the plastic container and we would use it to pickle, I don't know, cucumbers or, whatever it is, use it for storage. So those are my favorite parts, are when you're able to make that cross-cultural connection into being human,
Yeah, yeah,
so yes.
awesome. And so now you've got the meat there, and you've got your veggies, and you're starting to
I'm
put
gonna,
everything.
yeah, I'm gonna put all the, let me see, I'm gonna put, so this is just scallions, carrots, onions, and garlic. I'm gonna put that here, mix it in with the beef, and now I'm gonna start the marinade. This is going to be some sesame oil. I think this is a good amount. I don't really, when I make Korean food, I don't use recipes. I just kind of go by sight and taste. And this is some sesame seeds. And let's see, and then I was telling you before, I'm gonna try a little bit. this kiwi to see. Okay, it's actually not very sweet, so I am going to add a little bit of sugar.
When you do these interviews with people, are you ever like, is there ever something that happens where you're like, wow, I was totally not expecting that? I mean, you're in this jet stream of like internationalism and culture and food, but is there ever something like either a recipe where somebody says, hey, here's a really good hack, or this is something like the kiwi thing? I had no idea that kiwi served as such a successful meat tenderizer. I mean, I literally just texted my wife and I was like, oh my God, did you know this?
Yeah.
I mean, do you find these things happen throughout your experience as like a person who, you know this stuff, but you're like, wow, I never really thought about that. And there's this new lesson that I've learned.
Well, let me see. I think yes, there are so many, whether it's about learning about different ingredients, so one thing is, purple yam, because it's so pretty, it became like a huge splash in social media and it's super trendy now. Like Trader Joe's even carries like purple yam. It's also called ube in the Philippines in Tagalog.
Yeah.
So ube is like a huge deal right now. Even Trader Joe's carries ube flavored desserts.
There's an ice cream store in Cleveland, in Ohio City, that's run by Helen Quinn and Jesse Mason, and they have ube ice cream.
Yeah, so I learned to make that with the Filipino Grandma Lumen, and it was really cool because so you can find purple yam. Actually, so one shortcut is, usually we tend to think that, if you get it raw, you get it whole, it's better. So she actually says it's easier to just like get it frozen, because then you don't have to go through the whole process of like mashing it, because purple yam dyes your fingers. Because of that purple pigment. It's a very deep purple pigment when you're actually cooking with the actual tubers, which we do on in her episode. And so she actually gets she'll find it frozen and already mashed up. So she actually kind of prefers it that way. It makes it a little bit easier for her. I hadn't really cooked with octopus before, and I certainly hadn't had it as like a tomato sauce braised dish. So when I had I had the octopus as a stew that was, based on, let's say, foundation was like tomatoes and red wine. I mean, that really, I was like, oh my God, I didn't really think that this tomato based octopus stew would be so friggin' good, and it really, really is. So that kind of blew my mind. Oh, and my favorite thing was I made cheese with Indian grandmother Sani on my program. Like, I never thought that I was going to be making my own cheese, but I really did. So I made it with her, paneer. I made it with her. Of course, she made it look so simple. She's like whisked through all the steps, and then she's like, like, there it is. Here's like your beautiful block of like paneer cheese. I tried to make it at home my very first time, and I ended up with, because it's about boiling the milk and then adding the lemon juice, and then it's all about like the curds coming together. And the first time I made it, I'm not entirely sure what went wrong, but I ended up with like a nugget. It was like, so when she made it, it was like this big, and then mine was like this much, and it was like this. And it kind of tasted like lemon. It was still really good. I actually turned it into more of like, I drizzled like honey on it and like nuts, and became more of like a dessert, but that's not, she wouldn't have approved, like as a paneer, as like a savory paneer dish, which was its original intention. But then afterwards, I just kept making it. And then I actually made like a really nice like block, like a nice chunk of paneer. And
oh, that's so awesome. That's so awesome.
This is the, I just made the marinade. See.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And now I'm just going to mix it all together here. Oh yeah. And I just chopped some scallions over here.
Mm-hmm.
This is just going to be for garnish.
Okay.
So I'm just going to pour this in.
Okay.
And now it's just a matter of, getting your hands dirty, which I'm not going to do because we're doing this on video.
Yes.
But normally I would just use my hands.
Okay. And that meat's been marinating for a little bit with the kiwi and also the other the garlic that you put in there, and now those vegetables are coming in there, and it's just kind of creating its own sauce.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I think this looks pretty good, and then we're actually going to start cooking it. I mean, even because sesame oil and soy sauce are so fragrant, especially sesame oil, like whenever I make it, I just kind of like want to have it like beef carpaccio. Like I just want to like eat it because it smells so like you could just have this.
Yes.
It tastes so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love cooking, especially when it tastes really, really good. I mean, it smells really good as you're cooking.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think this is actually good.
Okay.
I think we're all set. So this is kind of what it would look like before you start cooking.
Beautiful.
Sour pan. Let me see. I'm going to heat, just waiting for the pan to get hot. I'm going to put just like a tiny little drizzle of oil. You really don't need much because the beef already has a lot of sesame oil in it.
Right.
You know, my mom and my grandma, they were always just like cooking kind of in a rush because they were just like, I gotta work, especially my mom, like just came home from work, you know, I just need to feed the family, like let's go, you know. And that's the other thing about mom and grandma's cooking is that it's not so much about the joy of cooking, it's about survival cooking. It's like, I gotta feed my kids. And then, you know, unfortunately, because, you know, historically and universally, gender roles have always skewed, you know, women in the kitchen. And so it's just a responsibility that they took on and has always been taken for granted. But I don't, you know, so I'm like, no, like we need to freaking we need to celebrate them. You know, we need to celebrate the work that they do. Fortunately for me, you know, in my relationship, my husband is a great cook, so we take turns. But you know, back then there really wasn't, you know, they couldn't really catch a break, you know. So anyway, so now I'm just gonna put the beef in, and I mean, I don't know. I think cooking is like such a good survival skill. Like you kind of need it, especially like, you know, when the pandemic hit. Like, I knew a lot of people who couldn't cook. They were struggling, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's such a good, it's not even just about like making something fancy. It could be something really simple. Just like, you know, pan fry a chicken. Can you make a really, really simple pan fried chicken taste good? You know? Right. I mean, and it takes only like a few minutes.
So is the smell that's going to be in your house right now just going to be glorious because like you'll have all that delicious meat and seasonings cooking? And
yes, I mean, so often, I mean, I cook Korean food a lot, but I don't always cook it. And so yesterday, what was I making? I like rendered bacon. I rendered some bacon with onion, and I was making like an Italian wedding soup. And then my husband came down, and then he was like, "Oh my god, this smell!" And I was like, "Oh yeah." I was like, I love the smell of bacon just like wafting in there. Bacon and onion. Oh my god, that combination.
Yes. I'm smelling it right now.
Yeah. If you were here, you would die because it smells like heaven right now. I do wish you were here so you could taste this.
It's just, we feel so lucky to be in your kitchen because you're sharing this incredible part of your culture. So, you know, are you, it was interesting. You were talking a little bit earlier, Caroline, as you were preparing this food, that you said that language fades, right? People learning their language fades, but things like this, these recipes go on. Like, what do you see like with that, you know, in terms of people remembering their where they came from, but also living very much in the present, because it feels very much like cooking is the way to do that, right? Like the way that you preserve your culture is the way that you survive, which is to eat. but it's also, you know, kind of making people realize like this beef bulgogi is from Korea. Like this is a Korean dish. And I'm just kind of curious about that because it's so true. Like the language aspect, everyone thinks, oh, you have to learn the language, but you're kind of talking about a little bit of a different language here, Caroline.
I really think it has to do with the international experience that I had growing up in New York. I really do. You know, those really special moments that I had with my grandmother. And, you know, I mean, in my home, it was just food. But when I leave my home and I'm in, you know, this international cosmopolitan city that New York City is, you know, that is like Korean food, you know? And then, so which means that there is like an identity to it. There it is, it comes from Korean culture. And then I would go over to like my Indian friend's home and, you know, her mom and grandma would make this like fried dough puri. And, you know, again, in her home, that's just food, but then outside of her home, that's Indian food, you know? And so, you know, I just always, and that food was different from the food that I was eating at home. But it was all so tasty. So I just knew that, you know, the foods that we have at home, there is a cultural identity component to it. But then, as I was saying, you know, it's also just the story of, you know, our family. And, you know, and then in terms of, and what you asked me about language, honestly, my Korean isn't that great. Like I am fluent in it, but, you know, it's really kind of, you know, it's conversational, but like my mom and my grandma, you know, they didn't stress language, like Korean language that much. But my grandma doesn't know English. So that's really how that's why I had to practice my Korean. Because that's the only way I could speak with her. But my grandma, I mean, she taught us like a very like a slangy Korean. There's lots of like old slang and like really like not proper, like not proper words, you know. That's how I know that, okay, like if I look at my cultural heritage, right? Because there are different elements of one's culture. There is language. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what, like maybe like a C, like a B minus, you know, like it's like what, like second grade level. But then, you know, I look at, you know, cuisine. That's another huge part of one's culture. And I'm like, you know what, this, like I'm pretty good with this. Like food, like my understanding of like Korean food, like that's pretty solid. And then just being able to eat at all my friends' homes. And I mean, that was culture that was going on. So you know, I've just been thinking of, you know, ever since I was young, I just knew that there was something so special there. And I really wanted to tell these stories, you know, especially because I think a lot of Americans, you know, tend to forget their immigrant past. And so this is a reminder for those who have maybe forgotten. And then it's also a celebration for those who continue to live it.
Such a great way to put it, Caroline. That's such a great way.
See how it's like all browning on like the bottom pieces? Those are
Yes.
pretty much done.
Oh, now
Yeah,
will that be served with a side dish, or what comes with it? Who's the guest of this amazing meal alongside that on your plate?
Me and my husband and my baby.
And that's it. And you guys will just eat that in a bowl, like no rice, nothing else, just straight up.
No, we have it. We'll usually have it with rice, and then, you know, kimchi, and then just any other like banchan. You know, we were talking about those side dishes that you get at a Korean restaurant. Whatever banchan we have. So it's not like at my mom's home, the rice cooker always has rice in it.
And so then you would put that there, and then you have this amazing meal, and then this is just perfect for your family and for anybody who wants to really have a gateway into Korean culture and cuisine.
Yeah. This is. I make this dish pretty often. Whenever I make this, I was just saying I make this dish pretty often. Whenever I do have guests or I entertain, this is one of my go-tos.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just garnishing it. And let's see. Okay, so here we have it.
Beautiful,
Can you see
beautiful, beautiful. Cooking with Granny, cooking with Caroline. I can see a whole range of kimchi product and sesame oil by Caroline, and really wonderful. And Caroline, it was just so nice to meet you today, and thank you. And we cannot wait to see you in person in Cleveland and us to you in Queens. And for anybody who's watching Cooking with Granny, follow Caroline on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Get ready for the book tour that's coming out. It's going to be a real amazing series, and we're so grateful to you, Caroline. Thank you.
It's at Cooking W Granny on Instagram and on Twitter, and on YouTube and Facebook. It's all spelled out, Cooking with Granny.
Perfect. And we are going to link your website to this. And I know I've seen some of the YouTube videos. They're extraordinary. And Caroline, it was just so nice to be with you today. And thank you for the time that you took to share this amazing story of culture and immigration with the people who are going to be watching this during Welcoming Week. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure of mine.
Thanks, Caroline.
All right. Bye.